I moved on her, actually. You know, she was down in Palm Beach. I moved on her, and I failed. I'll admit it.
Let's be honest. We're living in the real world. This is nothing more than a distraction from the important issues we're facing today.
Donald Trump apologizing and trying to turn the page after that leaked tape from 2005 showed him in a crude conversation about women. And it's time now for our Sunday group. GOP strategist Karl Rove, Fox News political analyst Juan Williams, New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, author of the new book, The Year of Voting Dangerously, and boy is it, and Jason Riley of the Wall Street Journal. Well, Karl, let me start with you and the rules of the Republican Party. Trump says he's not dropping out, and apparently it's almost impossible, maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong, for them to force him out. I know that the House GOP is going to have a conference call tomorrow morning to discuss all of this. How seriously is the idea of trying to find some way, either by force or persuasion, to get Donald Trump to drop out?
Well, first of all, there are two steps to this. They can't force him out, but they could declare him somehow ineligible. But realistically, the Republican National Committee can't replace him unless he withdraws. Then the members of the National Committee could replace him. But let's be realistic. The second problem is the states. We're already voting in more than a dozen states, accepting absentee ballot applications in several dozen more. I mean, there are ballots prepared in virtually, I would suspect, every state, and it's going to be impossible, virtually impossible, to replace Donald Trump if he were to decide to resign on most state ballots.
Is this being talked about seriously in Republican circles? You have dozens of GOP leaders, members of Congress, members of the Senate, talking about him that he should step down.
Well, I wrote about this in May when we were contemplating the problem for Hillary Clinton being indicted after the Democratic Convention. Let me just tell you, I'm not a lawyer, but after talking to a lot of lawyers, it's virtually impossible to replace somebody in August, let alone in October. And if he were to decide to do it, it would take a week or so to get the National Committee together to arrive at this. So we're talking about literally 2 or 3 weeks before the election. And at that point, virtually every state is sending out absentee ballots or having early voting or both.
Maureen, I'm sitting reading my New York Times on Saturday morning, lead story, the F-bomb, explicit descriptions of women's anatomy. These are quotes from Donald Trump. I also see the paper on the front page says, all the news that's fit to print. I guess I have two questions. One, what has happened to the Gray Lady, as the Times is called? And is this all just a promotion for your new book?
Yes. Chris, I think that Trump's lasting legacy, aside from destroying the Republican Party, will be changing the New York Times in these profound ways where for the first time we've changed our policy and we call politicians liars and presidential candidates liars, which we never did. I was always having to look up synonyms when I was writing about Dick Cheney. And now we've changed the policy again to use these kind of smutty words. So thank you, Donald Trump.
A contribution to the legacy of the Times and our culture. We ask you for questions for the panel, and we got a bunch and sharply divided opinions about the Trump tape. Michelle Foyles-Nash sent this on Facebook. All men say things to each other they wouldn't want anyone else to hear. Get on with the real problems of the country. But Melinda Steinhaus writes, I have been a supporter of Trump, but I think, unfortunately, in light of these comments, he should step down. The GOP needs to nominate Pence for president. There is too much at stake with the Supreme Court. Jason, look, let's be honest. Trump's crude comments about women are nothing new. I guess the question I have is, why is this the tipping point? Why is this the point at which a lot of people, particularly Republican officials, are saying, that's it?
Well, I think partly this is self-preservation. I think there's a lot of pessimism about Trump's chances in November, and you see party officials saying, we've got to count on split-ticket voters to help us hang on to the Senate. Maybe distancing ourselves from Trump will help us do that. I think there's also just a bit of exhaustion that is set in here in trying to defend all of the things he said over the years. I mean, some of us stopped or never did it in the first place, but others were waiting for him to turn it around, to grow up, to become more presidential. And now they said, you know what, it hasn't happened in the first 70 years of his life. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 30 days. And they're done with him.
What do you think about this idea of him dropping out? Not that the replacement would necessarily be able to beat Clinton, as we talked about all the ballots, but it might save the House the Republican House and the Republican Senate.
There is, that's one scenario. But another scenario, and a scary one if you're one of these Republican officials, is Donald Trump not going quietly and saying to his supporters, I told you the system was rigged, now take it out on the GOP up and down the ballot. That's a risk.
You know, all this is playing out, as we should point out, almost like a movie, almost like a Maureen Dowd book, hours before the second presidential debate. And I guess the question one is there anything Trump, you could see with Rudy Giuliani, not combative, very, you know, regretful of what he had said, remorseful, and saying, but let's get to the issues. Is there anything Trump can do tonight to take some of the sting out of this?
Well, I think the first thing he's got to do, well, actually, there are three risky strategies I can envision, Chris. One, ignore it, which is what I think Rudy Giuliani was trying to say. It's a non-issue. The man apologized. And then secondly, say that it's being overplayed by my opponents who are leaking this material. Maybe it was the mainstream press is out to get me, now putting this stuff out, and there's more to come and all that. And then get back to the idea that he's the great disruptor, that he's here to disrupt American politics. The status quo is unacceptable. Hillary Clinton's unacceptable. But the third possibility, which may be the riskiest, is to go after Bill Clinton. We saw this in one of his apologies where he said, I heard worse on the golf course from Bill Clinton. What if he goes directly at Clinton and at the idea that Mrs. Clinton has been part of the team that disparaged women who were involved with her husband? What happens then? How does Hillary Clinton respond? How does this audience, remember it's a town hall, how do the individuals there respond? I think that that's a very risky strategy given that we know not only about the tape, but Miss Universe, the things that he said about Megyn Kelly and the rest. It would really, I think, be an explosion.
Karl, we got about a minute left in this segment. You've advised politicians. You've been in this spot hours before a debate. Obviously, never quite this situation. But what would you, if you're sitting there, you're the senior advisor to Donald Trump, what would you say?
We saw it in Rudy Giuliani. Only sincere words of contrition will allow him to begin to salvage this. To say that this issue is bigger than him, that this experience of running for president has taught him the enormous responsibilities that he bears as the spokesman for this movement, and try and refocus it on the big issues. But it's going to have to be sincere and honest, and everybody's going to judge that. That tape on at 12 a.m. The apology. Saturday morning apology tape. That didn't come across as sincere. That came across as defiant and combative. And it needs to be sincere contrition. And even then, it's going to be hard. He had a narrow window to win. I think that narrow window is closing because it's very difficult to attract swing voters, particularly women.
And real quickly, if he were to do option 3 of Brother Williams over here and go after the Clintons.
Mistake, because what it simply says is, I'm just as bad as he is and he's just as bad as me, but his name is not on the ballot. Namely Bill Clinton. It's Hillary Clinton, and she can simply say, not on the ballot. And let's remember this. This is probably not the last or the worst oppo dump that the Clinton campaign has to go. He needs to set up for what's coming down the road by saying, you know what, I'm a changed man, but I changed in the last decade, but I've been particularly changed by the events of the last 14 months. I get it. You're asking me to change America, keep America from being transformed in front of your eyes, and I'll do that, and I'll take it serious.
All right, panel, we have to take a break here.